Cool.
Welcome to everyone. Today our guest is MMA fighter Kamuela Kirk. Kamuela, thank you so much for accepting the interview. So, can you please say, in short, a brief description of your achievements, of your career, brief introduction, so we'll go with specific questions.
Yeah. So my name is Kamuela Kirk. Nickname is the Jawan. I don't know if you heard that, but I live in Arizona right now, and we don't get a whole lot of rain. But when it does rain, it rains hard. It storms hard. I don't know if you heard that thunder, but it's pouring right now over here. Anyways, so some of my accomplishments, I won the IBJJF Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu World Championships twice. As a blue belt, I won once in gi, once in no gi. So, as in the juvenile division. So as a teenager and a kid, I did a lot of competing in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And those are my two biggest accomplishments. As far as MMA goes, I was 6-0 as an amateur. I finished all of my opponents as an amateur. 5 of those were in the first round, and I finished 1 in the second round. Now, as a professional, I now have 10 wins and 10 finishes. So 9 of those are in the first round, and 1 of those is in the second round. So things are going pretty well. And my most recent fight was last Friday, which was January 15th. And I'm hoping to fight again late March or early April.
Outstanding. When did you start training MMA?
So I started training in MMA. So I first started training in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu when I was 4 years old. My dad has been a fan of MMA and a fan of the UFC since UFC. And he started watching the very first UFC ever. And he saw this little Brazilian dude named Royce Gracie, who was smaller than everybody else, who would go out there and just run through everybody. It didn't matter what the martial art was or what the style was. It didn't matter if he was going against a wrestler or a striker, or it didn't matter. He would tie him up in knots and he would tap everybody out. And my dad goes, "What is Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu? I want to learn that, and I want my son to learn that." So I was 4 years old at the time. My dad got me into Jiu-Jitsu. So something that I kind of grew up doing on and off. And then as I got older, I decided that I wanted to fight. I had years of training experience, and I wanted to, take this and run with it. And it was always something that I kind of was good at, and it always came naturally to me growing up. And I started striking when I was about 14 or so, and then ran with it.
How would you describe your own fighting style?
Well-rounded. I would describe my fighting style as well-rounded. I trained in everything. So although I've been training jiu-jitsu the longest, I would never consider myself just the jiu-jitsu guy. I train striking all the time, Muay Thai, boxing. I've trained some Taekwondo as well, a lot of wrestling. So well-rounded. I'm truly confident wherever the fight is. If we're standing on the feet, I love it. If we're on the ground, I love it. If we're wrestling, great. So well-rounded, man. I train everything equally. That way I'm confident no matter where the fight takes me.
Outstanding, really outstanding. So, at the moment, do you have a nickname?
Yes, so my nickname is the Jawaiian, which stands for Jamaican and Hawaiian. My mother is part Jamaican, and I was born in Hawaii. So when I was a kid, my dad called me the Jawaiian boy, and he kind of got that from, there's a style of music, a genre of music called Jawaiian music, and it's Hawaiian music with some Jamaican influence. So it's kind of a hybrid, combination of the two. And we were listening to some Jawaiian music on the radio in Hawaii. My dad called me the Jawaiian boy because I'm Jamaican blood and born in Hawaii, and it was something that always kind of stuck. So so the Jawaiian is my nickname, given to me by my old man.
That's very, very interesting. Who are your sparring partners and coaches?
So my head MMA coach is Santino DeFranco, and so I first started training with him when I was 19 years old. I was still an amateur. I had 2, I think, amateur fights. So I think I was 4-0 as an amateur. I had 2 amateur fights with Santino, and then we went pro when I was 20 or 21. So he's been with me my entire pro career, and since I was an amateur. Training partners, man, I have a ton of training partners, several training partners. I train at Siege MMA in Peoria, Arizona, as well as in Fight Ready, as well as at Fight Ready MMA in Scottsdale, Arizona. Some notable mentions over there would be Henry Corrales in Bellator. Another training partner of mine is the Korean Zombie, who comes to town to do his fight camps out here. And, he's one of the best featherweights in the world. So I get to train with him. Ramon Salazar, Bobby Moffitt, Paris Stanford, just to name a few.
Outstanding. Do you have a favorite strike?
A favorite strike, man. My favorite strike is the one that puts them down. Whether that's a check hook, a right straight, whether it's a head kick, a flying knee. It doesn't matter to me, man. It is. I like to make contact with my opponent, wear my opponents down until I can put them on their backs and find the finish. So same thing. People ask me, hey, what's your favorite submission? I'm always like the one that gets him to tap. That's my favorite one. Maybe I'm working a triangle choke and they're not tapping, but I'm able to transition to the armbar. Well, in that moment in time, that armbar is my favorite submission, if that's going to be the one that gets them a tap. If I take their backs and they leave their necks available and I find the rear naked choke, you know what? Right then and there, I'm going to take the rear naked choke. I love jiu-jitsu, man. I love striking, and there's so many awesome combinations of strikes you can throw that land that are fun to throw and submissions to attack. So it's really an in the moment thing, man. Whatever's going to work in the moment at that time, that's what I'm going for, and that's my favorite.
So I assume the same rule applies to throw and take down, the one that drags opponent to the ground, right?
Whichever one takes him down, man. If maybe defensively they're trying to take me down, I'm able to hit a wizard throw. I love wizard throws. Maybe they're coming in aggressively and I'm able to change levels and hit a blast double leg. Well, that sounds good to me too. Yeah. I guess, man. Whatever works in the moment, man. That's what I like to do. Of course, I have my go-tos. If I'm gonna give you some go-tos, I love double legs. I love single to double legs. I love wizard throws. Things like that. But I rotate. You know what I mean? I rotate through and figure out what works.
Yeah, but according to what I've seen, the throw you just mentioned is one of the hardest throws ever. It has to be very defensive.
You're saying the wizard throw?
Yeah.
Yes, yep, that's correct. The wizard throw works really well when someone's trying to take you down. You use their momentum against them. As they drive in, you have a wizard. You turn, you lift your leg, and you throw them on their backs as they drive into you. So yeah, that is more defensive. I'm not gonna offensively attack away. If I have somebody against the cage, I'm probably not gonna go for the wizard throw. But if they're trying to take me down and I'm able to create some space, then I'll go for it.
Yeah, but my thoughts is that if you want to be a counter guy, you must have a great anticipation and a great feeling of the fight, which is not easy.
Correct. And that comes with cage time. That comes with training. When you're in a position and you've been there a million times, you get a good idea of what people are trying to go for and when they're trying to go for it based off of their grips and their underhooks and where their weight is at. So with time and experience, you do have a good idea and you can anticipate someone's next step. That's the name of the game, right? This is human chess. You want to be 3, 4, 5 moves ahead and be able to predict what your opponent's going to do without letting them pick up on your tails and predict what you're going to do. And if you can do that, you're going to be dangerous and you're going to be hard to read.
Outstanding. Can you discuss your first amateur fight? How did you feel mentally heading into first amateur fight, considering it was, your first time in the cage? So.
Yeah. So my first amateur fight ever, it was inside a boxing ring, and it was actually, excuse me, it was at my family's gym. So my family owns a gym in Peoria called C Gym MMA. That was the one that I mentioned earlier, and we had hosted some fights, and I was 17. It was 1 month to the day after my 17th birthday. So just turned 17 and was making my MMA debut as an amateur. Of course, it was the most nervous I'd ever been for anything in my entire life. Sometimes people count the days down, like, I'm 3-4 days out. I was counting down the weeks, and I used to get so nervous I would lose my appetite. Oh man, we're 5 weeks out, and I wouldn't want to eat. Oh man, 4 weeks out, and I was just so nervous because I had trained for so long, and the fight was going to be at my family's gym. So of course I didn't want to lose at my own gym. Everybody that I loved and cared about was at that fight, and it was my first time. Like I said, my first fight ever. I had a lot of hype. Like, oh man, he's been training for so long, and expectations for me to do well were so high. And on top of that, my coaches, they found me a tough opponent. So even though it was at my family's gym, I didn't fight a scrub. They found somebody who was a respectable opponent for me to fight against. And if I wanted to win that fight, I had to earn it. They didn't throw me a freebie. I've never, if you look at my record, man, I've always had tough fights. I've always fought top guys, even as an amateur. And my first MMA fight was no different. Anyway, so we square off, and we had an exchange or two on the feet, and I shot in for a takedown, and my opponent sprawled, and then I was underneath him, and so I did a forward roll so that I could kind of roll into my guard. And when I did that transition, my opponent left his arm in, and so as I was rolling to get my guard, he left his arm in, and I was able to lock up a triangle choke, and I ended up winning in like 54 seconds of the first round by putting my opponent to sleep with a triangle choke. And I stood up and I looked around, man. I see all my family and friends and teammates, and people are crying. And dude, it was one of the, actually, it wasn't one of the, it was the best night of my life, even to this day. It was the best night of my life.
Can I ask you one question? But when I was watching you, I had a feeling before talking to you that your triangle choke is your trademark. So, what is the secret behind that triangle choke?
Yeah, I do love triangles, man. I love triangles. I've been doing triangles forever. And I think that a reason why I'm so successful with my triangle chokes is because, number one, my coach has a nasty triangle, one of the best triangles, maybe the best triangle of anyone that I've ever trained with, Santino. And he's helped me tremendously with setting up the triangles. And then also, I've always been very flexible. And so I'm able to use my legs almost like arms a lot of times. And I'm able to bring my legs in where most people wouldn't really have the space, or the flexibility to move their leg or the dexterity to move their legs. And that's a huge help when I'm working my triangles. So yeah, I would say just over time, a lot of practice, a lot of reps, a coach who's instilled triangle setups in me, and then flexibility, dexterity in my legs.
Who was your toughest amateur opponent?
Toughest amateur opponent. Man, you know what? I forget his name. I forget what his name is, but I will say it was. So I've always fought at 145 or 155 or a catch weight at like 150. But one time I tried to fight at 135 at bantamweight as an amateur. I was young, like 18, 19, and I thought, I'm going to try. I think I can do it. I think I can fight at bantamweight. And the lowest I got down to was 140 or 141. I think it was 140, my official weight on the scale. That was the only time in my entire career that I ever missed weight. And that was the last time that I ever tried to fight at 135. I cut as hard as I could. I got as low as I could. It was to the point where my body was I was sitting in the sauna. My body was no longer sweating. I was just completely drained. It was the hardest weight cut of my life. And physically, I don't think I fully recovered because that was actually my only amateur fight that went to round 2, was after I tried cutting down to 135, and just physically I just felt drained. And then I ended up finding an armbar in the second round. But that was probably my toughest amateur fight. It was the first time that I ever went to the second round, and I just felt physically drained from the weight cut.
What is the greatest difference between your first amateur and first pro fight? I mean, your first pro fight didn't look that hard, right?
The first pro fight and my first amateur fight, they weren't too different. I won both of them by triangle choke in the first round. I didn't get paid for my first amateur fight. I barely got paid for my first pro fight. My first pro fight, I made $300 flat. It wasn't $300 to show and $300 to win. It was $300 flat. So there weren't a whole lot of differences between my amateur and pro fights, or debuts rather. Of course, I was nervous going into my pro fight, but I'm nervous going into every fight, because it means so much to me. I care so much about it. Whenever you're doing something that's important to you, you're going to be a little bit nervous when there are things at stake. And of course, when you go pro, that record is permanent. It doesn't matter really what happens to you as an amateur, because your record is wiped when you turn pro. But once you turn pro, man, you can't go back. So I definitely, felt a little bit more pressure, like, man, this is the real deal. I want to make sure that I start this thing off right. I want to be 1-0. I definitely don't want to be 0-1 and start my pro career off with a losing record. So there definitely was more pressure. But other than that, a fight's a fight, man. Whether it's amateur, pro, whether it's, COVID rules and there's no crowd, or whether you're fighting in front of thousands of people, or it's on TV, or it's a private event. When you're in there, man, it's just you versus another guy.
Yeah, I understand. What can you say about your first professional loss? It happened against Kyle Reyes, I think, in your fourth fight.
Yes. Kyle Reyes, that was probably my toughest fight. That was probably my toughest fight, because both of us, man, we just left it all in the cage, and it was a close fight. It is a fight that I thought that I won, but it was close. So I'm 10-4 as a professional, and 3 of my 4 losses are all 3 split decision losses, and they're all 3 fights that I thought that I won. So in my mind, I feel like I'm, on paper I'm 10-4. In my mind, I'm 13-1. And the Kyle Reyes fight was a tough fight. He was a tough opponent. That was my first time ever tasting defeat, and it was one of the worst moments of my life. And it's to this day, I'm so ultra competitive in everything that I do, and this is the most important thing to me. So being being extremely competitive, and then on top of that, this being so important to me, losing is just heart-wrenching. And when I took my first L, that was horrible. The sport, you hear people say all the time, like, the thrill of victory, the agony of defeat. In this sport, you experience your highest highs and lowest lows. And when I won my first ever MMA fight, as an amateur, that was the greatest night of my life. And when I lost my first fight as a professional, that was one of the worst nights of my life. So it's just that the sport is very, very extreme on both ends of the spectrum.
You defeated Edgar Escarega Viennese, so it speaks about your all-around aspect. Did you switch something in that fight? Did you change your fighting style? Or
this is for who? I'm sorry, I didn't understand the first part of the question. Oh, man, when you win fights, you always learn something. But when you lose fights, you really learn. You learn a lot about yourself. You learn a lot about how you're gonna bounce back, and how you're gonna make your return. And if you have to switch things up in the gym, you try to figure out what went wrong. And like I said, you do that in fights that you win as well. Even my last fight that I won, not this past Friday, but the Friday before, on the 15th. I watched that, and I'm happy with my performance. But of course, I always look and I go, okay, what could I have improved on? What could I have done better? So you're always growing. And losses are the same way, man. You look at what did I lose? Why did I lose? What could I have done differently? What could I have done better? You make your adjustments in the gym, and then you show up and you perform. And that's how it's always been, coming off of losses.
Yeah, it's outstanding, really, really. But you did a lot of adjustments in your career, and that's great. I mean, every MMA fighter should make it. About the fight with Kevin Croom, everybody say that Kevin Croom is a very, very dangerous opponent, and you defeated him. So, what do you think about that fight?
Yeah, Kevin Croom is tough. But man, all of my opponents have been tough. If you go through the record, if you go through my record, you'll see guys that I've beaten who have beaten guys who are in the UFC, or me fighting Kevin Croom, who's now in the UFC. I beat Kevin Croom in the first round. I put him to sleep with a triangle choke. Yeah, I guess I do like triangle chokes. Now that we're talking about it, I guess I really do. I put him to sleep in the first round with a triangle choke, and I controlled every aspect of that fight. He tried to take me down early. I landed on the feet with him, and then he tried to take me down after I was winning on the feet, and then I whizzed through him, and I was on the top and landed some ground and pound. We ended back up. He shot in for a takedown. As he shot in, I transitioned into my triangle, sat with it, and then ended up putting him to sleep in the first round. Well, he ended up making his UFC debut, and he won in the first 30 seconds. He knocked the guy out in the first 30 seconds of his UFC debut. So the guys that I fought and the guys that I've beaten are tough dudes. I have nothing but respect. I'm for Kevin Croom, and I'm very happy that he went out and won his debut the way that he did, because it makes him look good, but it also makes me look good too, given the results and my performance that I had against him. So, yeah, I fought tough guys, man. I train with tough guys, and I know what level I'm at. And at this point, man, all I can do is just keep winning and keep showing the world that I'm ready for that next level. And no matter what the organization is, whether it's LFA or a local show or the UFC, as long as I'm focusing on winning, then I'm going to achieve my goals and the goals that I have set out for myself in my career ultimately. So regardless of where I'm at, my only focus is winning, and that's it, no matter who they put in front of me.
About the White Contender Series, your debut, what can you say about the promotion, the fight you participated? How did you feel heading to Las Vegas?
Yeah, it was awesome. It was awesome. And I felt like I belonged there. The lights didn't get to me. The stage did not get to me. I saw Dana when I was in my corner, because my corner, he was right behind my corner. So I looked over at him and acknowledged him. He kind of gave me a head nod back. It was cool. I enjoyed it. I had a lot of fun. Of course, I didn't get the result that I was hoping for. But it didn't feel like it was anything too big for me. Sometimes when you're under those lights, you feel like the moment is too big, and that wasn't the case. And I can't wait to have that moment again where I'm fighting, but instead of for the Contender Series to get into UFC, I'm fighting in the UFC, and I believe that this is the year for that.
About your LFA debut, are you pleased with the performance? That's question one. And question two, what makes LFA different from other promotions? And do you think it's a magical springboard for the UFC?
Yes, those are good questions. So, first, to start off, I will say that yes, the LFA works with the UFC very closely. LFA is the number one feeder into the UFC, so more fighters get into the UFC from LFA than any other organization. They are also the only organization outside the UFC that's allowed to use an actual octagon cage. So you have the UFC and you have LFA. They're the only two promotions that use an octagon. So they work very closely together. So being able to fight for them is an honor. And they just treat their fighters well. I've never had a bad experience with LFA. They've always treated me well. They've always been incredibly professional. Even, something as little as this. For my last fight, they said that the weigh-ins were going to start at 10 o'clock. And we would have between 10 o'clock and 2 o'clock, 10 o'clock and 12 o'clock to weigh in. Well, I got there a little bit early, about 9:50, 9:55 or so. 10 o'clock on the dot, they open up the room, they open up the scale, and they allow you to go weigh in, which is so professional. There have been so many other organizations that I fought for in the past where they say, okay, weigh-ins are going to be at this time, and they don't start until 30 minutes later or sometimes an hour later, and you're sitting there dehydrated, hungry. All you want to do is weigh in so that you can start your recovery or your reload. So little things like that, little things like they say they're going to start at 10 o'clock. They know that we're cutting weight. They start at 10 o'clock. They treat everybody well. They treat everybody professionally. And you just get a sense like you're fighting for a big show. They have cameras everywhere. You know that you're on either, when I first fought for them, they were on live television, on Access TV. So they would come in the room and they say, okay, Kirk, you're up next. You're going to be fighting in 3 minutes. Get ready. So they're very, very on time. Now they're on UFC Fight Pass. So, you just get a feel that even though you're not in the UFC, it's a great way to prepare for it's like NCAA, man. It's like college basketball. It's like you're not in the NBA yet, but you're really damn close. And it's a great way to prepare for the big leagues. And that's how I feel fighting in LFA.
What was your game plan for Guilherme Santos fight?
My game plan was so Santos is tough. He's tough, man. He trains over at Team Alpha Male. He hits hard. He's got great jiu-jitsu. And if you look at his wins, almost all of his wins come by finish. He's got, I believe, 3 knockouts and 4 submissions. So he's a finisher, so he's got that killer instinct. And yeah, man. And so I wanted to go out there and just be patient with him. From what I've seen, he tends to come out, pretty aggressively. And so I just wanted to be calm. I wanted to be patient. And I just wanted to pick my shots. I wanted to be calculated with my striking. And that's what I did, man. I was calm. I was relaxed. He caught my kick at one point and I was on my back and I started looking for another triangle and he could sense it. He could feel it. So then he stood up and let me back up to my feet. I don't think he wanted to spend too much time on the ground. And then I started finding my rhythm. I started finding my range. And then once I did, I turned it up a little bit, started wearing on him, started landing bigger shots, bigger and bigger shots. And once I could sense that he was hurt, I knew it was time for me to go in for the finish. But yeah, man, he's a tough opponent. But like I said, everybody that I fight is. And, no easy fights. My record is not padded. Everything that I have, man, I've earned. So Santos was no different. Another tough guy. And it was good to go out there and get the first round dub.
What are your plans for the future?
So my plans for the future are to keep doing what I'm doing. I used to think so much about the UFC, and I still do think about the UFC, but it was always I used to dwell on that, like, oh, the UFC, the UFC, the UFC. I just want to get in the UFC. And again, don't get me wrong, I do want to get in the UFC because that's where the best competition is. The best fighters in the world are in the UFC. And if I want to be the best, I have to beat those guys. I got to be competing with those guys. So I still want to be there. But instead of constantly thinking about like, okay, maybe I'm going to get a short notice fight into the UFC or maybe this or maybe that, or all I'm thinking about is winning. And I'm letting my managers do the rest. My managers will get me in the UFC when they can get me in the UFC. If the opportunity to find the UFC doesn't arise for my next fight, and we fight for LFA again, then we fight for LFA again. the rules don't change. You know, the game plan doesn't change. I'm still going to go out there, focus on winning. And I know that whether I need one more win or two more wins or maybe zero more wins, maybe I get a short notice call today to fight in the UFC. But regardless of when that happens, as long as I just keep winning, I'm going to get where I want to go. My goal is to be UFC champion. And, in multiple divisions. I want to, have very, very big goals for myself. And in order for me to achieve these goals, man, I just have to keep winning, whether it's for for LFA or when I get in UFC too. I just have to keep winning and getting better and improving in the gym, staying healthy, training smarter, always learning. And as long as I do that, man, I'm confident that I'm going to get to where I want to go and need to go.
It is believed that it's impossible to learn everything in MMA. Do you back that theory up or not?
Oh, yeah, man. I have forgotten far more than I have remembered in this sport. And part of that is, too, you're not always going to use everything that you learn. Sometimes you learn techniques and they don't really fit with your style. Maybe my coach shows the team a technique and my teammate loves that technique. He gravitates towards that technique and he starts using it all the time. That becomes his bread and butter. Maybe for me, it just, I didn't like it as much. It felt maybe uncomfortable or awkward or whatever the case may be. And I just never really added to my repertoire. So, yeah, I have forgotten, man, over the years far more than I remembered. But the things that I've remembered and the things that I implement in my game, I do again and again and again. It's like that Bruce Lee quote, right? He doesn't fear the man who knows 10,000 kicks. He fears the man who's thrown one kick 10,000 times. So you don't have to know everything, but get very, 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 very good at what you do know. Look at my coach, Jiva Santana, the arm collector. He armbarred everybody. Look at Ronda Rousey. She armbarred everybody. When you are so good at something, people can know what you're going to do and still not be able to stop it. And all Ronda really did was that one technique. She had the armbar. That was her thing. So you don't need to know everything, man. You just got to be really, really good at what you do know.
Would you like to add something to the interview? Would you like to give a shout out or maybe to mention something we forgot to mention?
I appreciate the opportunity. Thanks for having me on the show. It's always fun. I always enjoy doing these. And anybody who's watching, check me out on social media. My username is The Joanne. It's like Hawaiian with a J. The Joanne. Hit me up and give me a follow. That'd be cool.
Thank you so much for the interview. I will put it to creation now. Probably gonna be up tomorrow. I will send you a message.
Sounds great. Hey, thank you for the opportunity, man. I appreciate it.
No problem. I hope next time we talk, we see you in the UFC.
Yes, me too. Thank you very much, sir.
Right. Goodbye.